it's those pesky electrons.
Get that sorted out after I do my
Yeah. So welcome to the first anniversary of the Voice AI Meetups. We had the first one of these a year ago. It was small and very, very kind of nascent. But month by month, this community has grown. It's super fun to see a bunch of old faces and new faces here. Whichever category you're in, thank you for coming tonight. I hope you make some new friends and hear some really interesting new ideas. Speaking of interesting new ideas, before that, I'm supposed to say, get swag, make sure you eat pizza, and the bathrooms are around that corner. Those are important. But the first order of real business tonight is to thank Chroma for letting us do this in their space. Chroma is a really cool database built from the ground up for the needs of AI applications. So I know it's very close in theme to a lot of things we all think about all the time. And Anton from Chroma is going to tell us just a little bit about it.
Hi, folks. Yeah, welcome to Chroma. One other small piece of housekeeping today. I am the cleanup crew, so if you would please stack your plates in one place in the room, so I don't have to find out where you live. Welcome to Chroma. Welcome to our office. As Quinn mentioned, Chroma is a database for AI applications. How many people in this room already knew what Chroma was before they came here? Yeah, you'll have to see it. How many use it? Considerably less than there should be. I think it's a really interesting time to be building with AI. I think that we are in the very early stages of a new kind of software development, and I think that even if we stop training the models today, even if they got no more new capabilities, we would still be figuring out all the useful things that we could do with them for the next 3, 4, 5 years. And so the thing that I encourage people to do is to experiment as much as possible. Now, right now, this hot word of this talk and meetup, et cetera, is agents. And this is the subset of people who care about voice agents. And there's like 300 of you, which is really cool. This is one way to build applications. Another way is to build retrieval into your applications. This is what Chroma does. Chroma is a retrieval system for AI applications. It is free. It is open source. You can download it. You can install it. 2.5 million developers do every day. The main thing that I want to talk about, though, is we have just expanded access to...
Use the mic for the live stream.
We have just expanded access to our private beta, and we're particularly prioritizing people who are building the sorts of forward-looking, future-looking AI applications that you all here are working on tonight. So if you'd like to get on the wait list, just sign up at trychroma.com, and I'll be looking out for your signups and onboarding you as a priority. We think we've built just the best way to build with retrieval in AI applications. We would love for you to try it out. I think it's pretty great. Thanks, Quinn. Otherwise, I'm very excited to hear the talks that are on tonight. I'm going to see if I can get the speaker working because I think I just need an extension cord. Otherwise, off we go. How about it?
Awesome.
I'm going to go see what I can do.
Can I bring the panel out?
You can bring the panel out.
I'm super sorry, but can I ask that you move down to the end just because your head is in the autofocus? Thank you. No, it's another electron style problem. You guys can pass the mic around. So welcome our panel here. They'll introduce themselves in a second. The theme tonight is Voice AI in 2025. So let's let our panelists introduce themselves briefly, and then I will kick it off with a couple of questions. And then I think it'll be like a free-for-all.
It's not on.
Oh, it's not on?
Okay. Now. But it's for the live stream. Oh, cool. Hi, everyone. I'm Sean, or Swix. We record the Latent Space podcast right here because of the kind generosity of the Chroma team. And we've been doing a lot of work on documenting multimodality. I spoke at the OpenAI Dev Day for presenting a voice app, and because I'm really excited.
And did a really cool demo.
We co-published the unofficial real-time API guide that OpenAI has endorsed, which is kind of funny that we can do that.
Takes a village.
You can just do things.
That's a tough act to follow. Hi, everyone. I'm Shrestha. I'm a product lead for the Gemini APIs and AI Studio in Google. And we recently came out with our own version of a real-time API and have been collaborating with Quinn and the daily team on that. So excited to be here.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. I'm Neve Gavin, and I'm here to lower the bar. I've been dabbling in voice for my sins for a while and kind of VP of Applied AI for a couple of the cloud providers.
Hey, folks. I'm Kern. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of a company called Cartesia. We're a startup that builds voice models. And we are a company that believes that on-device is going to be the largest deployment of AI in the next decade. So we're working to build really smart models that you can run very efficiently in all kinds of deployment environments.
As you can tell, this is a very humble group. I will try to bring out why all of these folks are superstars in the questioning, because they all are. But I really like the fact that they're not telling you that themselves. It's a nice vibe this community has. I'm Quinn. I'm one of the co-founders of a company called Daily. We make AI infrastructure for real-time voice and video. We are also the team behind an open source vendor-neutral framework called PipeCat, which is currently the most widely used framework for building real-time multimodal AI stuff. And we love feedback, and we love patches and contributions and documentation. So join the world. Yeah, and get some swag. It's good swag. So we're going to talk about voice AI in 2025, but we should first talk a little bit about 2024. 2024 was a very fun year, I think, for all of us, definitely for me. I am a computer programmer because I fell in love with the internet in what you might call the Web 0.5 era. And I have loved every era of global internet expansion and technology improvement, the cloud and the mobile. But to me, 2024 was the first year that felt like 1995, 1996, 1997 felt. We are all figuring out what the next building blocks for computing look like. The shapes are maybe starting to come into focus. And for voice AI particularly, I think this is an exciting moment because it feels like last year we built a bunch of the pieces all together as a community and figured out some of the very low-level components. Voice activity detection, sort of hybrid voice activity detection, super low latency network transport, interruption handling, some of the abstractions you need. And now it feels like we're stepping up a level and figuring out what the next layer of building blocks looks like. And that's a whole nother exciting thing to do. So that's sort of my framing for 2025. But I want to pass the mic to Swix because I don't think there's anybody better positioned to tell us what happened in 2024. So what happened with multimobile in 2024 and where are we now in January 2025?
Yeah, so you prepped me with this question, and it's very broad. We've done a full recap of 2024 episode that people can look up, but just specifically focus on multimodality. I don't like the word multimodality because it assumes that all modalities are equal. Vision is first among equals among all the modalities, and so vision became consensus in a sense of like it used to be just GPT-4 Vision, then 4o came out, then we also had Claude, and now Claude also is natively multimodal everywhere. Ooh, we fixed it. Nice. Hands up for whoever did that. Yeah, sorry for people who are having trouble hearing. So yeah, went from just GPT-4 having Vision to then the launch of 4o, and also Claude launching with native multimodal, and now Gemini being also natively multimodal with a free tier that is so free that you can just leave it on. I will not shut up about this. This is like very generous. You should all be using it because you can just program your vision model with text, which is underrated. So that's vision, and I think we all know and love vision. Then what happened with voice? We had voice mode come out, and then eventually the API. I would say voice has always been kind of like comparatively like the redheaded stepchild. Like for a long time, OpenAI only offered Whisper 1, on their API, and like they released Whisper 3, they were like, we can't even be bothered to host it on our APIs. You just go use Fel or something to host it, or one of the other sort of ESR providers. Anyway, so I think that is all converging, right? Like everyone's working on the model convergence. 4.0s, the O in 4.0 is meant for omni-model, and that that is ideally meant to be sort of audio, visual, and text in the same out. Same for Llama 3. They have not released some of the adapters that they need for this, but eventually it will come out as Llama 3 or Llama 4. And I think like Gemini also, with the Gemini 2 announcements, they're increasingly enabling that feature. I don't know if it's for voice necessarily, but you can speak to that. But yeah, I mean, that would be my recap for the state of multimodal in 2024.
That's a good segue to Shrista. You had maybe the busiest and highest profile December of anybody I know. And the first time you and I met, we bonded. To what Swick said about voice not always being top of mind for people, you and I bonded over how important time to first token is. Because I'm always hammering on about that. And actually, that's how I met Neve too.
You should tell them your cool fact. I believe we were going.
I have a lot of cool facts.
So there was a cool fact around time to first token, which maybe Swix remembers. But
well, one of the things that I tend to yammer on about is how it really irritates me that all the benchmarks that are published only publish throughput numbers. Like if you don't publish time to first token, like I actually can't use your benchmark. Like literally, I can't use your benchmark. So, if you can get down below 300 or so milliseconds time to first token, then you're like in the realm where voice really matters. And you and I had that conversation the very first time we met. And then you shipped all this incredible stuff in December. So how did you build up to all those launches in December?
Well, the short answer is with your help. But, I think when it comes to voice, I mean, Google's obviously been thinking about that. Google and every other big company, right from the assistant days. And then along the way, there was a lot of investment in Project Astra. Notebook LM, you could argue, was voice-driven application. And so a few of us were talking about what would it feel to make something like Astra, not exactly Astra, I should clarify, available through an API. There was also, as we were talking to the developer community, we would keep getting these requests, everything from voice assistants to more interactive gaming experiences were some of the use cases we heard. And even putting voice aside, for bidirectional streaming, we would also hear a lot of data processing, in like real-time data processing use cases. So we knew that there was real need for a bidirectional streaming API. And then, of course, there was competitive pressure with a few well-timed releases. So I think all of that contributed to us feeling like, as part of that Gemini 2.0 release, we finally had a model, and we finally felt like we were in a place with all the components that we could release a directionally credible real-time streaming API. But of course, to your point, it required working through a lot of pieces, like turn detection. Like we're just getting started with that, but to have reasonable turn detection, tool use. Quinn keeps sending me daily emails about how a certain tool is not working or a certain combination of tools are not working, but we had to do some work both on, let's say, the data side as well as system instruction side to get tools and combination of tools and compositional function calling working. Pre-processing of video tokens, that was another big area we had to work on. And the hardest thing was getting all of this working together even in under a fraction of a second to really provide that real-time experience.
I think we should have made T-shirts for tonight with a time to first token club, members thing. Let's jump over to Karan first before we come back to Neve to bring us into 2025. You only launched in May.
June.
No, because I looked at my
Really?
GitHub. Yes.
Oh, it might be May 30th or
May
something.
29th.
Okay.
Because I try really
June in my
hard.
book.
I try really hard, if I possibly can, to build some at least minimal Pipecast integration every time something interesting launches on the same day. And I looked at my
You're
commits.
probably right.
11:35 p.m. on May 29th. So I made it by 25 minutes on your launch day.
That's cool.
So I was proud of that, and I remembered it, and I looked it up tonight. But honestly, it seems like you've had an incredible impact on the voice AI space in only half a year. Startups are roller coasters. A lot of people in this room do startups. I would love to hear a little bit about your roller coaster for the last 6 months, and maybe framing it as like what surprised you in a good way and what not in a not so good way.
Yeah, I think so it's been right about 6 months. I would say one of the things that I remember from January of last year actually was when we were trying to do our seed round. And in a lot of those conversations, I think a lot of folks that we were talking to were very confused about why we wanted to work on audio and not video. Because we started out as a lab spin out from Stanford, and so we were looking for problems to work on with some of the new tech stuff that we've been doing on state space models, and we knew we wanted to eventually work on video, but we were looking for an entry point modality, and we thought audio would be better because it's more capital efficient to train audio models and you can get to market faster. But I think at the time, like it wasn't quite the feeling of like voices everywhere. So I think a lot of folks were confused. So that was kind of surprising, I think, last year, which was that I think right around when we were releasing our product, our text-to-speech engine, it really was starting to blow up. And it just feels like every few months, it's unimaginably larger than before and seems to be everywhere. So that I think was quite surprising. I didn't think the velocity with which like people would care about voice would be that high.
I mean, to me, it felt like it took a long time, and then it started to happen very fast.
Yeah.
And I do think we should give credit to OpenAI. Shrista
Totally.
mentioned the competition, and it's really fun from outside to watch the competition between Google and OpenAI, because I think it's fun just as a sporting event. But I think it also raises the bar. And one of the things that the releases from both Google and OpenAI do is focus attention on things that are interesting. And that the sort of early GPT-4o demos that OpenAI released definitely changed the conversations we had around voice. It went from trying to convince people, hey, this is an important modality, to people being like, oh yeah, I've always known that, which is what happens in technology transitions.
Yeah, I think it's like quite visceral when you interact with voice systems. And so I think without having a great voice system like OpenAI built, it's very hard to imagine it for someone. And so that was very helpful. And after that, obviously, with Google and other folks being more excited about it, I think it's been very good. And on the maybe like the experience post-release, I think one of the pieces of advice I got was you should launch early. And we thought we launched as fast as we could, but probably could have launched faster. And spent the first 3 months, I think, just trying to get the product to work, because we trained a model, and early users, including you, found a lot of problems. And half the folks here were like using it in the first week and complaining about a lot of things. So that was very helpful. And I think we started to get a handle on how to build these models better over the last 6 months. So that's been an area of, I think, improvement. But I think in terms of pains, you can't go fast enough in a small company. So that's been a learning experience. Yeah.
Bit of a spicy. So quick survey. So voice mode launch, everyone has it. Who used it in the past week? Like, okay, like 20%, 30%, maybe 30%. And who's like maybe built with the API to do something with it outside of ChatGPT? Wow. Okay. Okay. We are in a voice meetup, so I feel like this is unrepresentative. Anyway, like I feel like there's this thesis of speech to speech that was very, very strong. And maybe my one controversial thing was that people sold speech to speech very, very hard. We had Kyutai Moshi and 4.0. And here we are. Like, I mean, I don't know what the relative market share of speech to speech is versus the PipeCat like chaining things are, right? Like, you still want to have a chain of models.
I mean, I'll say two things about that just today, and then would love to hear kind of what people are thinking, you know, Shrista and Karan particularly, about goals for 2025. And then I want to come back to Neve and talk about CES. But to a first approximation, nobody is using speech-to-speech in monetizable production use cases yet. And that's okay, because actually the multi-model, low, very fast data pipelining approach actually works really well. It's well over the 80-20. So if you're building a production voice use case and you actually have to ship something to users and you have to do evals and you have to have consistent performance and you have to be able to orchestrate a bunch of things around the core model behavior, you should use the stuff that's more mature. Like, that's just a normal tech story. On the other hand, it's very clear to me, not a model builder, but I build a lot of stuff on top of models, that native multimodality in all the modes is the future. And it will come. And one of the reasons we build orchestration framework layer stuff is to make it relatively easy to make that transition. As that's a big transition. We want to make that transition easy. Turns out if you aim to make a transition that big easy for developers, you make a lot of other things easy too.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think a lot of the folks that we sell TTS to, for example, are doing orchestration because that's where it's easier to bake in business logic into the actual behavior of the voice bot, which is the main pain point I hear about. I think we think speech-to-speech is the future. We're also building a speech-to-speech model. And part of our goal is not to compete with Google OpenAI, but we just think it's the first multimodal model that is fundamental. And we must build it because we have many plans to do more on top. And I think for on-device specifically, which is some of the things that we're very interested in, it's much harder to run orchestration on a on-device deployment because you have many moving parts and you need to orchestrate all of them on, let's say, mobile or other, even embedded. And I think it will be much cleaner and more elegant to have a single model that you can basically deploy. So there's many reasons I think that voice native will be very, very useful.
Yeah, and we also find that with use cases which require more steerability, I think voice native does help where you're lead testing. So, yeah.
So on to 2025. It used to be that the tech year started in Las Vegas with CES way too early in January every year. And then CES seemed like it wasn't that relevant anymore. But I wish I had gone to CES this year, and I watched live streams of the NVIDIA keynote and other things. And Neve, you were at CES. So what did it feel like? Is CES back? Is this the year of consumer voice AI? Like, what did you see on the floor walking the show?
I'm probably the wrong person to ask because I felt like the wait but wise stickman walking around at all this, looking at all this unnecessary innovation. They're like Japanese businessmen whizzing past on motorized luggage suitcases to kind of like toasters that could talk to me. So they kept the skeptical Brit rightly at the far end of the strip in the Four Seasons with the CEO board track. And actually kind of following on from Sean's question there, I was actually really reassured, and what's kind of relevant to this audience is that there is actually a market there, to your point. When you're behind closed doors, I got to be the prompt engineer to the CEOs and try and provoke them. And I was like, look, this is all just hype, isn't it? The public market said, what's your Gen AI strategy? So you went out and made 1,000 flowers bloom and pilots. And now the pendulum's strung to the other extreme where they've said, okay, it's burning a hole in your pocket. Where's the actual use case here? And they actually all turned back to me and were selling me on Gen AI. And they said, no, like this is an actual game changer. We've baked it into our strategic plans. We found real ways in which it's value add to our business. And so some of them, there were the media companies, the execs of like Disney or Liberty Global, etc., who are Netflix and so forth, who were already using it for dubbing, which I think we all know, but that was just such a game changer of being able to monetize their content globally in an instant, where before it would be country by country and complex. They use it for storyboarding. And even what was funny with some of the infrastructure providers on the customer service side, I was asking them, okay, that's fine, but what about, the risk of hallucination? They were like, Neve, the bar is so low when it comes to customer service and Broadcom and so forth, that actually that risk is worth it. And then I was asking them, okay, what about your employee base? How are they in terms of adoption? And they were saying, actually, both our worst performers and top performers equally want to use it for opposite reasons. The worst are like, make me better at my job. And the top performers are like, how can I be better? So I was really struck by the pull through in terms of real kind of commercial use cases at scale that they were deploying, and they were actually not as risk adverse as I thought. But then in terms of the complexities, they're facing all the same challenges that we are in terms of buy versus build, open source versus closed. What about the flow through of the licenses and general kind of systems architecture and evals, etc. So I really see them as a much stronger ally in the field than I was expecting. And if you get some of these really big enterprise partners as design partners, you can really steer the market to your advantage of, okay, this is what quality looks like. These are the trade-offs and mechanisms by which you should assess different models in terms of speed, quality, and cost, and so forth. So there were some really promising conversations behind closed doors compared to the absolute madness on the floor. It's like you then walk into Vegas and you're just like, what is happening when it came to demos on the main floor.
This has always been a wild hodgepodge of every kind of thing. The phone cases building and the massive Samsung booth coexisting in the same show. I mean, I have a mildly hot take and a maybe hotter take around what you said. I am 100% convinced that it's now possible to build a voice agent that is better than the median customer support voice experience. And that doesn't mean that some people don't do a much better job than an LLM can do, but it means that a lot of people do a worse job than an LLM can do for a whole bunch of interesting reasons. And I can talk way too long about that. My hotter take is I think the median LLM voice interaction can now be better than the median healthcare patient touch point. That's sort of a big net, but I'm pretty convinced of that too. Although it's pretty hard to convince people who have worked their whole career in healthcare of that today, and I totally get why. Maybe I could throw it to Shrista related to that, which is you work at kind of every layer of the stack, which is one of the things I envy about your job. You get to work kind of down at the models and build the APIs that let us access the models, and then Google builds apps. You were talking about Astra.
Yeah.
When you're thinking about your roadmap, and if you want to tell us secrets from the 2025 roadmap, you can. What drives the agenda? What drives the priorities? Is it app level down, or is it research possibilities up, or is it something else?
Well, I think like always, it's a mix of both, right? I think I'd say in 2024, what drove a lot of the priorities was research level up or, competitor level in. I think in 2025, the focus is shifting more to, how can we make some of these apps or some of these technologies more meaningfully useful, more consistently useful, right? Like we all agree, I think here that customer support is one of the, and coding perhaps are two of the use cases that have broken out, but how do we find similar use cases that people are using? I mean, I can't explicitly speak to roadmap. This piece that I can't explicitly say is what is coming when. But I think when it comes to the real-time API and where we go from here, again, with Quinn and team's help, I think I would break it down into, I would say, 3 categories. So the first category would be, what do we need to do to take what we put out there and make it production ready so that our developers can really take it and use it in production applications. And I think a few of the areas that we need to tackle there are the session length right now is abysmally small. It's like 2 minutes or something for video and about 15 for audio. So what are certain things we can do to around context management, around session management, around caching to increase that? Tool use, as we said, we're just getting started on that journey. How do we make the existing tools work better by themselves together with other tools? Let's say you want to use search and code execution together to do some like data analysis at scale. I think turn detection, there's a lot of work we have to do there, just improving voice quality. So those would be things that fall into the category of just make some production use cases work. Then the next category would be unlock more production use cases. So right now we only officially support English, although it does work for other languages in a kind of sort of broken way. But how do you officially support other languages? How do you support non-human speech use cases? Custom voices is another one we hear requests for from time to time. Quinn and I have talked about like bring your own turn detection methods. So those are some of the other categories. And then I think the third category is what are the applications that Google could build on top of that? And, I can't speak a lot to them right now. I think as Quinn, thank you. As Quinn said, Astra, Project Mariner are some of these applications. But, one category that we've been seeing is we've seen a lot of people do screen sharing of a certain app. I personally have used it to get better at Photoshop and ask the voice agent for tips. And right now, the voice agent doesn't do a very good job. Like it mostly focuses on describing what it sees on the screen. But you can imagine it getting better at sort of taking that visual input and talking back to the user and guiding the user better and getting better, whatever it is that they're using. So those are, certain things that we're thinking through.
On the productionization side, I think if I ask everybody in the room who's building stuff, if you have enough evals and you were honest, I don't think any hands would go up. I know mine would not. You've done a couple of shows, more than a couple of shows on evals. What do you think we're gonna all be doing a year from now that's different from what we're doing today in terms of actual evals? Throwing you a curveball, I know. I mean, honestly, I'm asking you because I listen to your shows on evals to try to learn what the state of the art is and what's coming.
Yeah, really basic. The state of things is really basic right now. People don't even do them. So even doing like literally does this pass a simple vibe check is important, and we will support that. At the same time, we have to cater to what people want, and if people don't act, they say they want evals and they don't actually want evals. We can see that in the data. And
that mean? You mean the adoption downloads of like eval platforms are just low?
Yes, among the more sort of hypey popular crowd, and then obviously the more enterprisey you get, the more serious you get about evals. So on my Brain Trust episode, I talked about this sort of software development lifecycle of how people build AI applications. And there's typically that choke point of like when you get serious, when you start to invest serious money and spend serious money, you're like, we need evals. We need to migrate, and we need to swap out prompts and whatever. So you like that's the choke point. And I thought that was a really good piece of insight that basically Brain Trust had over and above all the other ops companies, which I was very impressed by. For 2025, I have in here somewhere, this is my list of like what will change in 2025. So I'm just adding, I've like added a whole bunch of blue based on this conversation already. I'm very bullish on LLM as judge. People always like, haha, we know the LLMs judge literature is like not great. Like LLMs prefer their own output. We know this. We know that they're not calibrated. There's all these problems, and then they haha, and then they stop doing it, and they don't take it forward. I think there will be multiple LLMs judge startups emerging. There will be dedicated models just for LMS Judge. There's pretty much only like 1 or 2 right now. People are starting to release like reward models that are just that, but like this field can just be a whole lot more, and that we pretty much have to just invent this from scratch, because there's no other way to scale this. Like no one else wants to write the deterministic evals that people think that we need. And I mean, good luck with voice.
Yeah, I mean, one of the challenges is just that evals are different from unit tests and different from end-to-end, CI/CD. And so we like everything else in this space, we got to figure it out. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I think I agree with most of what you said. I think I just have a slight counterpoint on the hypey crowd, if I might. So, with the Gemini APIs, we do serve a lot of the smaller startups and the indie developers. And I think the other problem there is there's not always enough time or resources to run proper evals if you're not an enterprise. And so then you tend to go with whatever is the most hyped model in the hope that that you'll, come out on better with that.
They know they need to do it though.
Yeah.
Well, that's progress. We're coming up on time, so I'm going to slam a few questions together because, I know this panel really well, and they all have sort of nice overlapping, complementary perspectives. So here's how I'm going to do the next to last question. There's a bunch of things that go into the amazing progress we saw in 2024 that doesn't seem like it's slowing down in 2025. And so if you're thinking about it sort of from the model and implementation perspective, you've got the scale of the models, training setup, the architecture of the model itself, you've got data set, and you've got hardware. So in 2025, what's the mix of impact there? Or alternatively, what are all of you sort of most excited about, seeing the step function improvements in so that we get more capabilities?
Yeah, I guess on the model side, well, some of the things that we've been working on, and I think these are generally relevant, are latency. I continue to believe that driving down latency on these models to basically close to 0 is useful. Some of the things we've started to do more recently is actually get to internally at least 25 millisecond latency on these models, which I think is quite good and never been done before. And I think the reason to be excited about it is not just because it's great for audio. I think it's great for every model we will ever build. It will never be bad for any of those. So that's one piece. The models themselves getting faster. I think on the actual capability side, I think for real time, there's a lot of work to do, I think, in post-training and making these models very useful for specific use cases. One of the use cases that I am personally very excited about is in education, and actually having tutoring systems that can instruct and talk to people, especially kids, patiently and explain things. And if it's full multimodal, you can generate explanations, and you can ingest kind of all of the context of the learner to basically do a much better job teaching, I think. It's also a place where you don't necessarily need to go outside to generalize, in the sense that you're explaining things that have already been done or invented, right? So this is different from, let's say, trying to invent cancer drugs and so on. So I think it's a very good use case. Another one that I was talking to folks recently about was toys. I think that a lot of these models, this is part of the on-device side. I think if we can get them to be fast, efficient, you can have private models running on very interesting embedded systems. And I think toys are a particularly interesting set of embedded systems that I'm kind of curious where that goes. So this is just a grab bag. I think data, post-training, et cetera, for these things. I think pre-training as well actually is a place where there's a lot to be done still. I think one of the things that's happened actually, which is good for smaller model companies like us, is that the playing field is actually relatively level. I think the models are getting really good at fairly reasonable scales, and the amount of money you need to spend to train a frontier model is going down. And so for companies like us, we don't actually need to buy out a data center to train models. I also think multimodal is actually the Wild West in terms of understanding how to train great models. And so you can imagine small teams actually doing frontier work there, because it really is about two people and getting into the problem and just figuring out how to do new things well, which I don't think is something where having 1,000 people will help you scale faster. So I think a lot of the model side, actually, I'm more optimistic about, because I think the playing field has leveled and there's a lot of interesting problems that are new and need to be solved quickly.
I'm going to ask a follow-up, which I hope is a good transition to Neve, because Neve has a lot of experience in the hardware space. Do we need new hardware, new generations of hardware to run the on-device models you're building, or are we going to get really good on-device models, by some definition of really good, without big step function improvements in hardware?
Yeah, so I think that they're like our whole bet is that the architectures that you use to actually build AI models are outdated in some form. Obviously, everybody uses transformers. Transformers are amazing. You can basically train very high quality models, but they're not very good for, I think, eventually the types of models will need to run on device, which will need to be very efficient, and they will need to constantly process data and remember and improve over time. I think that's not something that transformers will be ever good at. And so I do think for on device, I can't speak to the hardware. I think that even if the hardware stays the same in the sense that it's on the same trajectory, I still think that the architectures will quickly become a bottleneck. And so that's something that, again, we are sort of think of ourselves as a company that's riding the current wave and then trying to create the next wave. And I think the next wave will require an entirely new stack, new architectures, new types of models, solving new problems on device and lots of different applications there.
I mean, ditto. So I think the thing which really surprised me about the close of 2024 is how all the elements that you just alluded to suddenly started to come together in a way and a speed and a manner that I hadn't seen before. Like, I'd been working in voice for my sins in the past, kind of ASR and so forth, driving down latency, like you were saying, then trying to work on agentic workflows that didn't get stuck in a local optima and weren't so brittle. And suddenly in Q4, it seemed like suddenly you could do speech to speech in an interactive manner with fairly good kind of quality and real workflows. And it still has that visceral element. As you were saying, at CES, you still get that gasp from the audience when you do it. I think the kind of open question I have, which I'd love to throw to Quinn and Corinne, is more around, as a founder or a product builder, the buy versus build and the native versus chain together question seems to be even harder than in the past, because the systems architecture is even more decomposed and complex than in AI previously. And the great thing is the community is moving so quickly and there are more developers than before that you don't have to wait too long for there to be a solution to be crafted. So how do you decide what to bring in-house and develop a secret source versus leverage what's out there to start with until it becomes the weakest link and kind of the element that slows down your end product? But
yeah, I guess, I mean, we're a pretty small company, so we don't do that many things. And I think we try to stay in our lane as much as possible. It's very easy to get distracted and try to do too many things. So we constantly have to keep culling and just make sure that we're not trying to do more than a couple of things at a time. I think we're pretty full stack. We train models, we build inference engines on top of our models. We have a full platform underneath, and then we obviously build product. So we're kind of trying to do everything, at least as far as one model and application is concerned. But yeah, I mean, I think we're trying to figure out wherever we can get leverage from other folks that have built things better than we have, we want to work with them. And yeah, I don't know. Build and buy, I will say we're too small to be answering that question.
I mean, it's very good advice to a startup founder to not work on anything that's not strategically core to your product and your business model. It's very hard advice to follow, partly because if you're a startup founder, your kind of personality might be tilted in a different direction, and partly because, as you were saying, Neve, it's genuinely hard to figure out where to draw that line, especially when that line is moving around a lot. I mean, in our context at Daily, and these things are always context dependent, I mean, we're an infrastructure company. Our job is to move packets around the internet at extremely low latency for use cases that people care about. And the challenge for us is how far up the stack to go.
Right.
And so one of the conversations we have a lot these days in the voice AI space is like, how big an SDK do you need to give people for developers to succeed? And I mean, I've been having these friendly discussions with friends in the WebRTC space for more than a dozen years. And there are people who strongly believe that you should just give people minimal tooling and let the community build SDKs. And I'm far more on the other end that, and this is partly painful, lessons painfully learned by what actually works for certain, developer personas. But I think for complicated things, you need to give people like pretty big bundles of functionality. And, there's not a right or wrong, but there are over time bets you have to place.
Just to bring it kind of back to very quickly to the question that you asked, kind of looking forward and aligning it with hardware. I do think that 2025, as you were saying, Shruti, is that it will be the year of production, gone are kind of the MVPs and the chains of APIs and more things like SDKs and pulling it through to commercialization at scale with greater reliability and evals, not just pre, but post and real time with quality assurance and all the things we used to have in the past. And if that's the case, then vertically integrated, as you were saying, even if it's a single use case, is so much quicker and easier to debug because you have more within your control. There are fewer dependencies. It's easier to kind of spot the thing that stopped the 5 nines and all the SRE. When it comes to hardware, I feel that the two are even more intertwined and less bifurcated than in the past than ever before. NVIDIA really is a software company as much as it is hardware. Its moat comes down to that ease of use, the portability of the TRT, the NIMS microservices now on top, the fact that it's the embedded incumbent that everyone's optimized for, and therefore you can leverage the whole community to continue to optimize for it. I think the area where despite the number of competitors in the data center server side, be it your Groks, your Samba Novas, your Cerebras, et cetera, who've hit that wall of adoptability because they've got their own compiler and therefore they need to decompose everything out of the nice contained TRT container back to PyTorch and recompile. Plus you've got much longer tape out timelines. And in addition, now that the world's kind of got used to APIs, they need to really build out a cloud provider and therefore try and learn how to scale up huge data systems that NVIDIA kind of outsources to CoreWeave, et cetera, means that it probably is more embedded, pun intended, than we realize. But the innovation I found, especially at CES, was actually more around on the edge side. So Qualcomm's Snapdragon was pretty good. AMD's new device chips were pretty effective as well. Apple, as you were saying, in device. And so that may actually cause a shift on the model deployment front to, if we're getting smaller and we're breaking things down into specific tasks versus one model to rule them all, can it run locally and it only jumps out to the cloud provider for the more complex stuff and then comes back in. So I think that could drive innovation on a device speed, and that's great for the voice community because that's probably where there's even less friction to adoption than elsewhere.
Yeah, I agree with whatever the two of them said. And I think, basically every part of this pipeline from pre-training to post-training to, whatever you're doing in the API platform, SDK layer, all of this will be important. I think some of the things that we're trying to think through as we think through our roadmap is how do these various components work together to provide a good experience. So for example, turn detection, we want to train the models to do better at turn detection, but then we've talked about use cases where enterprise customers want to bring their own turn detection, right? And so how do you build a product that has that flexibility built in, where the model is intelligent enough, but then you have the additional product layer flexibility? Another one is, when a tool call takes a really long time, what should the real-time API experience be? And you can imagine some kind of, my research lead says, yes, we could train the model to deal, intelligently deal with these situations, but it'll be a while before they do it predictably and gracefully in every scenario. So should there be some kind of canned workflow on top of that? And how do we not make that brittle as it interacts with the model? So I think it's also important to think about how these different components interact together.
Cool. My classic. So I think I feel like there's been enough conversation that the question has fallen on the context window. So
happens to the best humans and models.
I mean, I have the question. So like basically the question is like which is the wall, right? Like the architecture, training techniques, data sets, and scale. My facetious answer is always actually there's another category which is engineers. Because we have a bunch of models that are trained and nobody putting them into production. San Francisco is great because it's full of them, but actually like there's still not enough. Probably we need to 100 to 1,000x the number of engineers that work on AI, and that's what I do. But within the set, I think I have to pick data, and I think that data is simultaneously closing up at the same time that it is becoming more valuable. So all the walls are getting put up, all the lawsuits are getting drawn up, and we're discovering new data sets that we really need. We were the first podcast to interview the NotebookLM team that did the sound model. And guess where they got the data? The engineers on that team sat and listened to the NotebookLM output and iterated on that sound model for 3 months. I was like, did you do any evals? No. Their eval was just the vibe check of the engineers on that team. So that's the only source. The NotebookLM team is the only source of high quality audio data that you can use to produce that, and that will be sat on by the NotebookLM people for the rest of the time. So like this will be increasingly very, very valuable. Everyone's like trying to race towards like open O1, in terms of architecture, but they don't have the reasoning data, and like that's what we need to scale up.
Let's close with a hot take for 2025 from each of you.
Oh, okay. Mine's very easy. Forgetting things will be optional in 2025.
I thought someone here said they don't like multimodal, but I have to say I'm very excited about like different modes working together in if we have time, I can talk about one of my favorite use cases around like that I heard talking to some founder about using multimodal to help casting directors find unknown actors by finding clips of them somewhere randomly on the internet and then using it to generate like screen tests and see how the actor might fit into a specific role. So, lots of use cases that different modes working together might enable.
I think increased pressure towards understanding versus imitating, less on the knowledge recall side, but more on the physics, kind of real world embedded agent side.
I guess one thing that I'm very bearish on is robotics in the way it's done. So I think there will be no progress in robotics in 2025.
I think you delivered with the hot take, because you can hear the audience reaction. Mine is going to sound a little less hot after the insight from this panel, which I think is a good thing. I think it means it was a good panel. I think the thing that we will be talking about in January 2026 that very few people are talking about today is that hybrid execution of the AI workflow is going to become really, really important, meaning some of the model stuff will be running on your device and some of it will be running in the cloud. And we haven't, to my knowledge, nobody has built any good abstractions for developers to make that easier today. But some of the most interesting apps I see getting built with PipeCat include both local and cloud inference. I turned off my mic, but it's actually my job to say thank you to all of you. This is fantastic. I can't thank you enough for coming out tonight. And thank you to all of you. Stick around for another half an hour or so if you want to, and talk and come ask these wonderful people questions. And thank you. Oh. Oh, we'll have one of these in February. So come back out in February.